I was 15 years old, my family took a trip to Florida to visit friends. Because of our friends' generosity, we were able to stay in a beautiful home in Orlando and visit all of the parks at Disney World free of charge. Not only this, but I was able to bring my best friend Scott along for the trip. I was so excited. I couldn't think of anything better. Now, despite the fact that we would be traveling to what is often called the happiest place on earth, I decided that I needed more entertainment. And so I brought my Nintendo GameCube. I just bought a new game, and I wanted to play it with Scott. Scott and I ended up playing this game more than we did just about anything else on this trip, short of sleeping. And this was a problem, not because it kept us from enjoying other elements of the trip, but because I got competitive. Something like that. I had always been competitive. Growing up, I played sports. I loved board games. I would even shout answers at the television when Jeopardy was on to try to beat the contestants. But something about this game, Soul Calibur 2, really got me going. And that was unfortunate, because by the second day of the trip, Scott was whooping me mercilessly. I just couldn't win. And I couldn't stand that. I couldn't believe that he had come with my family on my vacation and was beating me at my video game. I deserved to win. I had done so much for him. I couldn't think of a single reason why I should be losing. But I continued to lose. By the end of the trip, I had said some things that I regretted. I had thrown my controller at least half a dozen times across the room, and I had almost punched my best friend in the face. This is one of my most vivid memories, in large part because Scott remains my best friend to this day. But as I look back, I realize that my life has been filled with experiences just like the one that I described, where I felt like I deserved more, lamented the fact that it wasn't being given to me, and got angry. There's a word to describe this type of behavior. Entitled. I've wrestled with feelings of entitlement for my entire life. When these feelings arise in the moment, I rarely recognize them for what they are, but after the fact, I can see how they've poisoned my mind and potentially impact relationships with the people that I love. With that said, I'm willing to bet that I'm not the only person in this room who has experienced something like this. Because if you have ever felt like you deserve something more than somebody else, put somebody else down to further yourself, or done something selfish without thinking about the consequences, it's because you felt entitled to that. And if you regretted anything that you had said or done or thought, then you fought the same battle that I have. I decided to build an argument against entitlement, to try to change my relationship with it so I could understand it better. I figured that if I've been able to rationalize my way into these feelings for almost my entire life, surely I can rationalize my way out of them. Along the way, I've realized that the impacts of entitlement go far beyond any individual who feels it. As a practice, it's embedded in the fabric of our society, and that alone makes it worth talking about. I'd like to share the 3 points of my argument with you today. Number one, our entitlement is part of a larger game, often a zero-sum game. In economics, a zero-sum game is one where the gains of the winners are proportionate to the losses of the losers. A good example of this is poker. In poker, there are a finite number of chips, and if you win a hand and you get 50 chips, those 50 chips are being lost by other people. When we feel entitled, in order for our wish to come true, something or someone else is going to have to cede resources and opportunity to us. And when we're talking about scarce resources, that are in such high demand in our world, like money and power and status, it's inevitable that there are going to be winners and losers. Why does this matter? Think back to the story I just told about the time I spent in Florida with Scott. I wanted to beat him so badly at that game. I wanted to win every single time, and I did not care if he won once. But I never stopped to think about what my overwhelming victory might mean for him. Anger, sadness, disappointment, feelings of resentment towards the situation or even towards me. And I wouldn't be able to fault him for any of that, because nobody likes to lose, especially not 100% of the time. If this example strikes you as insignificant in the broader scope of our lives, I assure you that it's scalable. Let's say, for example, that you are the Secretary for Health and Human Services in the United States of America. And because of the work that you're doing, because of the respect that you've earned and the responsibility that you carry, you feel entitled to privately chartered flights whenever you travel. These flights cost money. And you might not stop to think about what your expenditures mean for the availability of resources now and in the future. And consequently, you might not realize how that impacts the ability for your department to deliver on its promise of public service. What I'm trying to say is this: when we feel we deserve something more than somebody else, or we have something and we hold tightly to it and not think of the consequences, we need to remember that there are other players in the game. Which brings me to my second point. Entitlement is an individual feeling, but it's become a societal issue. I've realized that entitlement manifests itself in two different ways. As feeling that we deserve something that we don't have, but also as holding tightly to something that we already do. I've been interested recently to see how the former of these ideas has been cited as a reason for concern for the future because it's a hallmark of the millennial generation. But I'm more concerned about the latter of these two ideas, because that type of entitlement is something that's been carried by our country's most powerful social class since the beginning, and that class has been unable to shake it. I can say this confidently because I was born into this class. I'm white, I'm male, and I've been afforded the opportunity to get an education. I come from a small working class family, and I understand what it means to struggle in a small handful of ways. But I've never been systematically put at the losing end of somebody else's entitlement game because of my race or my gender or some other trait that I was born into. You see, when laws are passed in our country to promote equality for minority groups, a barrier is lifted, and the path towards equality may seem more clear, but balance doesn't install itself. It's a responsibility of people who have benefited from advantages in money, in status, and power to cede some of what they have and put it towards fighting for equality. It's our responsibility as people to be conscious of this. Because when we hold tightly to something that we already have and we don't question what that means for others, we could very well be causing damage to our society in the long run. In fact, some damage has already been done. And I'd like to share two easy examples of this with you. First, desegregation in America for schools was mandated following the verdict of Brown versus the Board of Education over 60 years ago. Yet, there are school districts in Alabama that are actively fighting to lock black students out of their programs. Groups of white people in predominantly white areas feel entitled to raising their children in an environment that is exclusive, and they believe that to be to their benefit. But these people choose to ignore the impact that this could have on those excluded. access to fewer resources, overall, a weaker educational experience. And it's things like that that contribute to stratification in our society. Another example. As recently as 2016, women in America were making 80% of what men earn for doing the same work. This comes 50 years after the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in the United States to pave a way for equality between genders in the workplace. Progress has been made, but as you can see, the rate of progress has actually slowed down over the past 15 years. Responsibility for this falls to business leaders who feel entitled to run their businesses as they see fit, which might include actively or passively supporting trends that pad their bottom line or push some other agenda, but are clearly unfair to some of their workers. These circumstances persist because when not violent or loudly oppressive, discrimination can be difficult to spot, let alone fight against. Again, when laws are passed in this country, it removes a barrier, it might clear a path, but it doesn't install balance automatically. It's up to people by their individual means to take stock of what they have and to push for equality. Before I get to my third point, I'd like to ask everybody in the room to think about someone that they feel carries a sense of entitlement. What is it about this person that makes you view them in this way? I can't imagine that you view this as an endearing quality. This is interesting to me because our society wields the idea of entitlement with a negative connotation and paints it as an extreme, which I think inherently makes us less willing to see it in ourselves. I think it's important that we normalize the idea of entitlement because whether we recognize it or not, it's something that we all feel every day. You may not be actively pining after something that you feel you deserve, perhaps more so than somebody else, but you certainly feel entitled to your sense of normal. Your daily routine, morning coffee, vacations, time spent with family and friends. These are all things that you've come to expect. But what if they were reduced or taken away from you completely? How would you feel? It's easy to forget when you benefit from something or you have a privilege that there are others in the world who don't have that at all, and some others who have it to a lesser extent and could still use the help. Ultimately, it's up to us to build a culture of self-evaluation and self-reflection so that we can do our best to reconcile our expectations and our wants with those of others. With that said, I'd like to leave you with one final idea. And that exactly is how we can begin to manage our feelings of entitlement, to embrace it at first, understanding that it's a part of us, but ultimately channel it in a way that's more effective, because I don't expect these feelings to ever disappear. A few years ago, a professor and researcher from the University of California named Paul Piff conducted a study on how to reduce feelings of entitlement in individuals. For this, he gathered subjects and split them into two groups. All of the subjects were asked to complete an evaluation that would allow them to be graded on the Psychological Entitlement Scale, or PES. The PES consists of 9 statements that respondents must express a degree of agreement or disagreement with. The only difference between these two groups was that before completing the evaluation for the PES, one group was prompted to name 3 benefits of treating others as equals, while the other was simply prompted to list 3 activities that they complete in the average day. What the study found is that the group that was prompted to think about others was significantly less entitled compared to the group that was asked about themselves. This is a powerful idea. Simply by reminding ourselves of the good that can come from doing well by other people, we can distance ourselves from feelings of entitlement, from feeling like we deserve more than somebody else, and by definition, promote equality and feelings of unity. I feel that if we were able to adopt this, ingrain it in our everyday lives as individuals, and allow it to scale up to a societal level, we would be able to potentially redefine how we view concepts like fairness and equality and necessity and what we deserve overall. So where do we start? I think it begins with ourselves. We need to teach ourselves to be humble, to stop ourselves in the moments where we feel like we're being slighted and we deserve something more than somebody else, and think of those others. Next, we need to engage other people on this topic, especially those who we feel are likely to disagree. Progress will never come by reciting the same idea in an echo chamber. And although it may be difficult to convince other people that they should see things differently, if you share your story of entitlement and your relationship with it, then perhaps you can convince them to feel the same way. And lastly, but certainly not the least of these points, we need to prepare to teach later generations, the ones that are coming next, what it means to be humble, and to provide them the active support and the structure needed for them to assimilate the idea of humility into who they are, so that it becomes second nature. This is a tall order, I know. But I believe that it can be done, so long as we hold on to one central idea. We're all playing the same game, and we're playing it together. So the next time you feel entitled to something, you feel like you deserve something more than somebody else, think about what that means for the others. And if you find it frustrating, just don't throw your controller. Thank you.